From MJ Griffin and Josh Minkins Jr. to Devin Neal, Cameron Kelly, and others, this is the most talented depth that the Louisville Cardinals have had at the safety position in years. So we're going to preview the position on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, and welcome in everyone to another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. Also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day, tuning in 5 days a week, covering your team every day. Today, we are breaking down the safety position for the Louisville Cardinals in the next installment of the offseason positional preview series. First, beginning with talking about and explaining why this team has the most talented depth at the safety position in years. We'll also talk about what the newcomer expectations are for guys like Cameron Kelly and Devin Neal. And then to conclude the episode, we will attempt to predict the depth chart. So, now, when we talk about the most depth at safety, I think that you look at the numbers of the position and think, well, Dalton, really, there's only, 5 scholarship players at the safety position? Cameron Kelly, Josh Minkins Jr., Devin Neal, MJ Griffin, and D'Angelo Hutchinson. So you wonder, and there were a handful of departures both via the NFL draft and via the transfer portal. So you look at it and say, really? 5 players at the position is the most talented depth-wise that this team has been in years? I'm not necessarily going to go as far as saying that, but you have to look at it context-wise. I'm making the statement that it is the most talented that the position has been depth-wise in years. I think that you can't underestimate the struggles that Louisville has had depth-wise at the position since the Bobby Petrino days, since Bobby 2.0. It seemed like Scott Satterfield really made it a point of emphasis to address those depth concerns, but with the revolving door at the position via the transfer portal, the NFL draft, Sat went out and got some pretty talented safeties. Quinterio Cole was a fantastic player on this defense. Kendrick Duncan Jr. Played a specific role for this defense, had a good first year. Second year wasn't necessarily the greatest, but he was a veteran within the group. He brought in MJ Griffin, who we're going to talk about here momentarily, who is a very, very solid player. So on and so forth. He has went out and gotten pretty solid players. However, I think he kind of got dealt a pretty decently bad hand when it comes to safety depth. Looking at from where the position was 2019 up until 2022, it was night and day in terms of safety depth. But overall, I think you look at this group and it's pretty much, I don't think it's close. I think that overall, you look at the group, not only the starters, although I would venture into saying that the starting group is as good as, it has been in the past 5, 6, 7 years, but you also look at the depth. You have a third team all ACC selection in 2021 transfer in, UNC grad transfer Cameron Kelly. You had a Lexington native who played for Baylor last year, Devin Neal. He had over 40 tackles for the Bears in 2022. You have a guy like D'Angelo Hutchinson who, a pretty talented guy coming out of high school that people have, been talking about in the offseason as a guy who has stood out a little bit. And then you also, I think another thing you have to look at here is the scheme that Louisville's playing, that 4-2-5 defense. You have players at the outside linebacker position that can play safety if need be. You have guys that played safety in high school. I'm not saying that TJ Quinn is going to play safety or Jalen Alderman, but I do think a guy like Ben Perry, you could see him slide into safety at certain, schemes, certain, packages. Gilbert Frierson played safety at the Power 5 level, granted better as an outside linebacker, has experience at the Power 5 level, playing with the Miami Hurricanes for the past 4 years, playing the safety position. So not only do you have the 5 talented guys that are your traditional safeties in the group, but you also have, versatile defensive backs that can also play safety. Ben Perry is one of them. You have Gilbert Frierson is another guy that could slide into that role. And I think that that's something valuable to think about is you don't just have the 5. You have those 5 plus 2 very talented guys. And I wonder if the addition of TJ Capers, who is a top 5 highest rated commit in program history, who reclassified, and Jeff Brom admitted on Thursday in his press conference that, look, it's going to take some time for him to get acclimated. But assuming that he does in some capacity, not saying he's going to be a starter, but a pass rushing specialist. He's been known as a guy who feels comfortable dropping back into covering opposing receivers. You wonder if that addition sort of is going to be able to allow you to deploy Perry, to deploy Frierson at the back half of that defense to sort of just continue to keep guys fresh and throw different looks at opposing offenses. I think that versatility is such a great problem to have with this defense because it's a very, very talented group, and you have a lot of guys that can play multiple positions. So when I say that it's the most depth at safety in years, number one, I am highlighting how bad the position has been in terms of numbers over the past half decade or so, but also I'm giving props to this team on paper because you have the veteran leadership, you have talented newcomers, and then you also have talented, versatile players who are currently listed as outside linebackers that are going to slide into coverage in the slot, potentially, dropping back into the second half of the defensive backfield. So that's something to focus on. But I really should kind of change that graphic on the right side when I say the most depth at safety, most talented depth. And I think it starts with, we're not going to get too much into the starting level guys just yet because we'll talk about the depth chart in the third segment. But the returning players, you have a handful of returning guys: MJ Griffin, Josh Minkins Jr., D'Angelo Hutchinson. 3 guys that I think are all 3 going to take respective leaps this upcoming season. Now, D'Angelo Hutchinson only had 6 total tackles in 2022. So he's going to be a guy that I think you're going to rely on as a depth piece, a player that, another year in the college ranks, you feel good about where he is going to be able to grow into a role. But you have Josh Minkins Jr. When he's on the field and healthy, it's clear that he is one of the best players on this defense, the 5th leading tackler for the team this past season, and he's still battled some injury. That's going to be the main thing to focus on. It's going to be the conditional statement, if you will. Louisville's safety group is going to be very good in 2023 if Josh Minkins Jr. can stay healthy. The 502 native, star of Ballard High School, was a fantastic player last year. He had 55 total tackles, 1 sack, 3 pass deflections, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble. So I think that, and then obviously he has been in this position group for quite some time, and that's something to look at, as well as that veteran leadership. MJ Griffin. Look, MJ is a player that we talked about, a player that's primed for stardom. I truly think that when he was on the field last season, good things happened for the Louisville Cardinals defense. He is a ball hawk in every sense of the term. He sort of saw limited action, had 45 total tackles, but he had 2 interceptions. He had 1 pass deflection. He had 1 forced fumble. He and Quincy Riley were 2 players that when they saw more and more opportunities on the field, more and more plays happen for the Louisville defense. I mean, you look at when he started to get a ton of time beginning in October. He had 5 tackles against Virginia, 9 against Wake Forest. He also had that interception against Pittsburgh. He had the interception against Virginia as well. 5 tackles against Clemson, 6 against James Madison, 9 against Kentucky. You understand the trend of what I'm saying. When he saw the field, he made things happen. The transfer from Temple had over 100 career tackles for the Owls. I think he only had, they're close to 100 tackles, I should say. He's over 100 tackles now. But a 6'1" safety that is a very, very hard hitter. I'm interested to see what he's able to do with another year in the Power 5. And then you have guys like Cameron Kelly, Devin Neal, who we're going to discuss here in just a moment, that I feel like are going to play significant roles for this team respectively this upcoming season. Jeff Brom made it a point of emphasis to say in the press conference, look, we had a good offseason in terms of bringing the transfers in. Most have been participating with the program through spring ball. Some had injuries, some did not. Some were late additions, some were late arrivals. But he feels good about where the team is as a whole on paper. It's about keeping the guys fresh. And then not to mention you have guys like Ben Perry and Gilbert Frierson who could also slide into the safety position if need be, or in certain packages, certain situations, and feel good about them playing as the safeties in this defense. So, look, I think bottom line is this is the most depth at safety in probably over half a decade. I'm trying to think of when that was the case, maybe the early Bobby Petrino days. And you may think that maybe the numbers don't necessarily support that point, but the talent does. The statistical production in the group does. And on paper, I just don't think it's close. I think that you're probably looking mid 2010s is the last time that Louisville has had this depth at safety. So let's kind of break it down a little bit. We'll discuss the newcomers. They got two commitments from the transfer portal. North Carolina's Cameron Kelly, Baylor's Devin Neal. Both are going to catch your attention in the fall. But an opportunity that should be catching your attention right now is the promos available over at FanDuel. Look, I've been talking about it, and look, I don't want you to miss out. So I'm going to tell you again why FanDuel is the place that you need to take advantage of. The MLB season is getting kicked back into gear here in about a day after the post-All-Star break, and you can get 10 times up your first bet in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll literally land $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose $200. You can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get that first home run. Look, my favorite player in Major League Baseball for my Houston Astros, Yordan Alvarez, starts his AAA stint coming off of an injury. He will be back with the team here in about a week or so, and you best believe that he is going to be in my bets to hit the first home run in certain games. Pick your favorite player, whether it's Shohei Ohtani, when Aaron Judge gets healthy, whoever it may be. It's all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. Look, there's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, like I mentioned, is the official partner of Major League Baseball. As I mentioned before the break, two players that will catch your attention coming in from the transfer portal: North Carolina's Cameron Kelly, Baylor's Devin Neal. Two players from the Power Five that have had pretty solid statistical production in their respective stints. We're going to start out with Cameron Kelly. It was an interesting situation in the spring. Louisville got a commitment from two former North Carolina guys in less than a couple days. Storm Duck, who originally committed to Penn State and then decommitted and came to Louisville. Cameron Kelly, who I believe it was committed to Virginia. I think he was committed to Virginia and then ended up switching his commitment to Louisville. So pretty significant news there. But Kelly is a former All-ACC level selection, third-team All-ACC in 2021, where he had a pretty solid season. Looking back to that year, 68 total tackles, 3 pass deflections to go along with 4 interceptions. Now, the 6'2", 210-pound native of Chesapeake, Virginia, took a little bit of a step back in 2022. Only had 49 total tackles and 1 interception, 1 pass deflection to go along. But look, I think that is 150 tackles in his career at North Carolina from the defensive back position. So definitely something to focus on. Played 4 years with the Tar Heels, battle tested in the ACC. One thing that I will tell you that I've heard from people that I trust within the scene at Chapel Hill told me that Cameron Kelly battled injury in 2022. I'm not sure that it is necessarily a secret, but Kelly battled injury, played selflessly, played through injury to help his team, and still ended up putting respectable numbers up in the statistical numbers. So I think that that's one thing that when you look at what he did in 2022, that don't necessarily get caught up looking at the statistics, because at the end of the day, he battled through injury. There's a reason why the numbers took a little bit of a dip. But Louisville's getting a very, very talented player that could end up as a starter level guy at some point in the season. And the only reason that I'm not projecting him as a starter right away is because you have two key returners in Josh Minkins Jr. and MJ Griffin, who are going to be NFL level guys this fall. That's not to suggest that Cameron Kelly is not either, because I do believe he's going to be. And then you have Devin Neal from Baylor, from the Lexington area, played 3 seasons with the Baylor Bears, and had his best season to date in 2022, got better each and every season, almost doubled his number of tackles, had 41 tackles in 2022, 1 pass deflection, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. So his best year to date in the collegiate ranks was this past season. 6 foot, 205 pounds, I think is really going to play a pretty solid role for the Cardinals depth-wise. You look at what he was able to do, game log. He had a career high in tackles against a ranked BYU team early on in the season. Well, actually tied a career high. And then he also had a very, very solid game against Oklahoma State, where he had 6 tackles. 6 tackles the year before against Texas Southern, but overall was a guy who played pretty well against solid competition. So one thing to focus on is both Cameron Kelly and Devin Neal. It's not a situation where you're going into the transfer portal and you're wondering whether or not a player is going to be able to translate that skill set and that production over to the Power 5 ACC. Because one of the guys played in the ACC. He was an all-ACC selection a couple years ago, and he has over 150 tackles to his name, veteran leader. And then you have another guy who played in the Big 12, not necessarily known for having a great defense throughout the conference, but Baylor's defense was pretty respectable under Dave Aranda, and Devin Neal was a guy who got better each and every season. Kelly has 1 year left. Devin Neal has 2. What is to be expected from both of those guys individually and respectively? Well, I think it's sort of the same for both. Both are going to be relied upon to, at the very least, be key depth pieces that play substantial snaps for this defense. Their veteran leadership is going to be relied upon. That's one thing that you don't have a lot of youth at the position outside of maybe D'Angelo Hutchinson. There's no true safety. There's no true freshman coming into the safety position. And then the other guys, Ben Perry is coming into his 3rd season with the program. Gilbert Frierson is a grad transfer. You have veteran leadership to where it's not necessarily so much worrying about the experience. It's more so just making sure that the guys fit within this respective system that Mark Hagan and Ron English are putting forth for the Louisville Cardinals. So I think respectively, the expectations for both are that they, at the very least, are able to play substantial, significant snaps for this defense, relied upon to make some big-time plays, to lead this defense from the back end, and to be able to help the team out throughout the season, beginning right away. I don't necessarily see any reason for there to be too much of a learning curve. I think that both of these guys have played in the collegiate ranks enough and for long enough to be able to pick up on, the schemes and the terminology, because they've had to do so already, and they have, physically, college ready bodies because they've been in the league in the ranks for quite some time. So I think the expectations are pretty high for both of them. Granted, you might say, well, how can they be that high if they're both not projected to be starting? I still think that the valuable depth matters. So often for the Louisville Cardinals over the past couple seasons, there were issues over, who was going to come in and play those valuable snaps if a player went down with injury late in the game, being able to rotate in and out. That valuable depth is going to matter. Just because they're not starting doesn't mean that they're not going to play a key role for this team. That's something you have to understand. And I think that most people probably do understand that, but for those that don't, we're going to say it again. So I think that for me, it's a matter of, getting to a spot where, both guys are comfortable and producing. for this team significantly week in and week out. So with that being said, we're going to take a little bit more of an overall sense, discuss or predict the two deep depth chart for the Louisville Cardinals. I think it's pretty spot on in terms of, well, maybe not necessarily in terms of accuracy, but from what I've seen from how people have projected it so far, mine are pretty similar to everyone's. In fact, my prediction is spot on with Matt McGavick of Sports Illustrated, Louisville site. And I think he does a great job of breaking down positions. So be sure to check his workout at sportsillustrated.com. But before we get into predicting the depth chart, I want to thank you all again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. To conclude the show, we're predicting the depth chart for the Cardinals. We will begin with the starter the position at free safety. I think MJ Griffin is the starter. Like I mentioned, the redshirt junior is one of the best players on the defense. When he played last season, good things happened for the Cardinals. Just under 50 total tackles. I think those numbers are definitely going to grow. He's going to be able to play a very solid role for this team, and I really do think that he is going to get a lot of NFL recognition for the draft come next March and April. And I think that Louisville's defense really got better when he started last season throughout the back half of the season. So I think that giving him that flexibility at free safety is a no-brainer here. So MJ Griffin is my starter at free safety. Backup is Devin Neal from Baylor. Like I mentioned, he was a guy who started for the Bears, and I think that could potentially start next season, but he's going to be valuable depth, a player that's playing a ton, a guy that's going to be able to rotate in, and you don't have a drop-off. That's one way for a program to take that next step forward is you have your starters, but when you do get into that valuable second and third string, you don't have that much of a drop-off, and I don't think that there's going to be much at all, if any, when Devin Neal comes into the game. He's going to play a big role for the Cardinals, and this is a position that you feel very good about. Assuming that the health stays pretty solid, that's something that you have to focus on, especially when you talk about strong safety. Josh Minkins Jr. is one of the best players on this defense. He did miss all of spring ball, but you already know that he is a great player. Last year was a breakout season, fifth on the team in tackles. He's going to be a guy to be relied upon in that back half of the defense. It's going to matter. It's going to be a matter of, can he stay healthy? And if he can, the Louisville secondary is going to be that much better. The ceiling becomes that much higher, and so does the floor. I think that veteran leadership, that ability to defend against the run, solid in pass coverage as well, he's going to be the starter at strong safety. This is a no-brainer here, and backing him up is Cameron Kelly. Same thing as the Devin Neal situation. It's not going to matter that he's listed as a backup. He's going to play a ton of snaps. He's going to be a guy that is relied upon, and Louisville's defense is going to bear the fruits of that veteran productivity, that veteran leadership, especially early on. You don't have to worry about young guys having to get acclimated with, a new role. You have guys that have, if they haven't produced for Louisville in the past, they produced at a previous stop outside of D'Angelo Hutchinson, who for me is going to be third on the depth chart, playing that key depth role, which people will say, well, it doesn't really matter being a third string. Yes, when you have five players at the position. Now, granted, you could have Ben Perry number 3. You could have Gilbert Frierson number 3 at strong safety or free safety. You have a lot of versatility within the defensive backs room, within the outside linebackers position, to give you that opportunity to essentially, mix and match with the guys at the position. But I feel really good about this depth chart prediction. It's one that a lot of people probably feel the same way, because you have the 2 returning guys starting, you have the 2 incoming transfers right behind them, and then you have a guy like D'Angelo Hutchinson. You have a couple outside linebackers that could rise into that safety role, maybe as a hybrid role. But overall, I think it's a pretty good prediction. If you have a different prediction, or better yet, I'm going to start implementing this exercise to where I'm going to ask you all a question. I'm going to ask that you comment down below on YouTube or comment on social media. You can find my Twitter handle, obviously, in the bottom left hand of the screen. The question for today, if you're still listening, which safety are you most excited about this upcoming fall and why? Just give me your sentence or so. I just want to see where everyone's head's at. So, but that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. We're going to conclude the positional preview series on the next episode, discussing the cornerbacks position. So be sure to stay tuned to follow and get all of the Locked On Louisville coverage. You can follow below.